My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I'm 30 years old. I grew up in the shadow of wealth, the adopted son of Walter Caldwell, a man who built an empire from nothing. My father's legacy has always loomed large, and while my older siblings, Tim and Kate, were groomed to follow in his footsteps, I was left to wander, forgotten. I've never fit in, always the outsider, the one who didn't deserve to be part of the family's picture-perfect life. But what really eats at me is the question I've never been able to answer: why did they leave me at that airport when I was 5? And why has no one ever talked about it? Now, with my adoptive father dead and a lawsuit hanging over my head from the people who should have cared for me, I'm about to find out just how much my life has been a lie. The truth, buried for so long, is clawing its way to the surface, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what it might reveal. I can feel it, everything is about to unravel, and I don't know if I'll survive the fallout. The phone call came early in the morning, just as I was finishing my coffee and staring out at the skyline of Manhattan. The city looked different today, like something had shifted in the air. When I picked up the phone, it wasn't the voice of a close friend or colleague. It was a lawyer. "You're named in the will," he said flatly, his tone as cold as the marble floors of the office building he represented. "Your father, Walter Caldwell, passed away last night. You're the sole heir." Sole heir. A lump formed in my throat. My adoptive father, the man I barely knew, had left me everything. But it didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like a trap. The call continued, outlining the details, the estate, the legal obligations, the inheritance taxes. But there was something else. A lawsuit. My biological parents, David and Margaret Morris, were contesting the will, claiming that I wasn't entitled to a dime. They argued that Walter had forged the adoption papers when I was 5 and had hidden my true lineage from everyone. They were ready to take everything back. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in my chest. I couldn't help it. It was all too absurd. I stared at the phone, the words echoing in my mind. They abandoned me at the airport when I was 5. And now, they want me to pay for it. My chest tightened. I was used to rejection. Growing up, I was always the odd one out, excluded from family meetings, left in the background of every photo. But this was something else entirely. I had to go to the law office. I had no choice. But as I pulled up to the building, the familiar sensation of being watched crept over me. It was like someone had turned on a spotlight and pointed it straight at me. I stepped out of my car, every nerve on high alert. The phone calls had already started. My name was being dragged through the mud, and I hadn't even had time to process the news yet. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry for your loss," the lawyer greeted me, his expression tight. He didn't look like he meant it. I nodded, stiffening. "How long do I have to respond?" 48 hours. Your parents have already filed their claim. They've made it clear they won't stop until they get what they want. The tension in the room was unbearable. It was like the air itself was thick with secrets, and every glance exchanged with the lawyer only made it worse. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I took the papers from him, barely able to focus on the fine print. The only thing I could focus on was the date at the bottom. The will had been signed just days before Walter's death. I took a deep breath. The man who'd raised me, who'd built his empire, had left me a fortune. But there was more to it. Something didn't sit right. The lawyer left me alone in the office to process, but the room felt suffocating. I walked over to the window, staring at the city below. New York, the city that never stopped moving. But I had stopped. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A sudden, sharp knock on the door. I turned, but the sound of a door slamming open cut through my thoughts before I could speak. I froze. A man in a suit stepped inside. Tall. Lean. His eyes were cold, calculating. "You're Ethan Caldwell, right?" he asked, voice low and sharp. I nodded, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't look like a lawyer. "I know what happened," he continued, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "You don't know everything, but you're about to." The weight of those words settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I had no idea what kind of game I had just been pulled into, but the stakes had just gone up. I stood there, frozen. This wasn't just about money. This was about something darker. Something I wasn't prepared for. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Don't trust anyone, especially not your parents. He turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, but his warning lingered in the air like a poisoned promise. Everything I thought I knew was about to fall apart. And I was just getting started. The man's words from the lawyer's office still echoed in my mind. Don't trust anyone, especially not your parents. It was a warning I didn't fully understand, but I was starting to feel the weight of it. Something wasn't right about any of this, the will, the lawsuit, my parents' sudden appearance. It wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about control, and I had a sinking feeling I was at the center of a storm that had been brewing long before I was born. I couldn't sit still. I had to move. The last 24 hours had thrown me into a vortex of lies, secrets, and threats. I grabbed my jacket and headed straight for the only person who might help me make sense of it all, Allison Turner. She was the only one who knew the truth, or at least, pieces of it. Her office was tucked away in a corner of a dilapidated building on the edge of the city, a quiet place far from the flash of the high-rise world I'd grown up in. I walked in without knocking, already knowing she'd be there. She always was, like a shadow lingering just beyond the light. Allison didn't look up from her desk as I entered. Her fingers tapped lightly against the keyboard, her eyes locked on the screen. She was the same as always, cold, calculating, with just a hint of something I couldn't read in her gaze. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said without turning. I need answers, I replied, my voice rougher than I intended. What's really going on, Allison? She finally looked at me, her eyes sharp. You really want to know, don't you? I nodded, but I wasn't sure what I expected from her. Truth? Deception? Or maybe something worse, indifference. She stood, pacing slowly as she often did when she was deep in thought. The hum of the fluorescent lights above us filled the silence, but beneath it, I could hear the steady thump of my own heart. You were never supposed to find out, Allison said, her voice low. Walter, your father, he was trying to protect you. But in the end, he was just as tangled in this mess as the rest of us. I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the anger that was bubbling up inside me. What mess? And why did they abandon me at the airport? She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her expression unreadable. You need to understand something, Ethan. Your father wasn't just some businessman. He was tangled up in a much bigger world. A world that he tried to shield you from, tried to keep you safe from. And as for your biological parents, David and Margaret Morris, they were part of that world too. I felt my pulse quicken. What are you talking about? The adoption. It wasn't as straightforward as you think. Walter didn't just take you in out of the goodness of his heart. There was a deal. A trade. A trade. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Allison continued, her voice steady but with an edge. Your real parents didn't abandon you, Ethan. They were forced to. They weren't allowed to keep you. The adoption wasn't a decision they made willingly. I shook my head. This doesn't make sense. I was 5. They just left me there, at the airport, and never looked back. They never called, never visited. How is that not abandonment? Because they didn't have a choice, Allison replied, her gaze unwavering. David Morris didn't just disappear. He was pushed out. Forced to sever ties. Walter. He made sure of that. I felt a sharp sting in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what she was saying. What do you mean, forced? I don't have all the details, but I know enough. Walter wanted you. He needed you. And when David refused to cooperate, he took matters into his own hands. She paused, letting the words settle in the air between us. He engineered your disappearance. He made sure your parents couldn't reach you. My head was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my life was unraveling, each thread revealing more and more of the lie I had lived. So you're telling me my own father, my adoptive father, was the one who... Yes, she cut me off, her voice hard. He orchestrated it. And it wasn't just for the inheritance. There was a bigger game at play. Walter didn't want you to know the truth. He didn't want anyone to know what he had done, what he had been involved in. I took a step back, trying to digest what she was saying. My adoptive father, the man who had raised me, had been playing some kind of game I had never even known about. A game that involved my real parents, a fortune, and a past I could barely grasp. You're telling me this whole thing, this lawsuit, this inheritance, wasn't a coincidence? No. It's all connected, she replied, her voice softening. The will, your biological parents' sudden appearance. It's all part of a bigger plan. But I'm not sure what that plan is. All I know is that Walter's enemies are still out there, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want. And you, Ethan, are at the center of it. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. I was the king, whether I wanted to be or not. A sudden knock on the door interrupted our conversation, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Get down, Allison hissed. Before I could react, she grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the desk. The door creaked open, and I could hear the sound of boots hitting the floor. A man's voice, cold and demanding, followed. We know he's here. We need to talk to him. Now. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I had to find answers. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth, or if the truth was ready for me. You're not safe here, Ethan, Allison whispered. Get out, now. I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the window, the world outside spinning faster than I could keep up with. As I ran, the weight of everything that had just been revealed pressed on me like a suffocating fog. But one thing was clear, I was no longer just running from my past. I was running from something much darker. I didn't wait to hear the rest. Allison's warning echoed in my mind, get out, now. I didn't know who was at the door, but I had a gut feeling it wasn't a social visit. The tension in the air was suffocating, each breath like pulling air through a narrow, suffocating tunnel. I moved quickly, silently, hoping I wasn't already too late. I turned, making my way to the window. The glass was cold beneath my hand, and the city buzzed in the distance, unaware of the storm closing in on me. I could already hear footsteps behind me, growing louder. They knew I was here. I yanked the window open, wincing at the squeal of the old hinges. As I slipped through, I heard the door behind me open. The voice came a second too late, he's gone. The alley was dark, and my heart was hammering in my chest as I sprinted down the narrow path between two buildings. My mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What did they want? But one thing was for sure, I had to get out of the city, fast. The weight of the will, the sudden appearance of my biological parents, and now these strangers on my tail, it was all too much to process. My past was a puzzle I was only beginning to put together, and every piece felt like it was slipping further away. I turned the corner, skidding to a halt as I saw a figure standing at the end of the alley. I froze, breath caught in my throat. It was a man, his features shadowed under the brim of his hat. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, waiting. Watching. I cursed under my breath. There was no way I could outrun him in this narrow space. I was trapped. Need some help? The voice was low, gravelly, almost mocking. I could feel the sweat running down the back of my neck as I took a cautious step backward. Who the hell are you? The man's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Someone who knows exactly who you are. You really think you can keep running forever? He stepped closer, his steps deliberate, calculated. But just as he reached me, a car screeched to a halt behind him. A door opened, and another figure emerged, a familiar face, Allison. "Move," she barked, shoving past the man with a sharp force. The man didn't fight her. Instead, he stepped aside, his cold eyes following her every movement. I barely had time to react before Allison grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the car. "Get in, now." "What the hell is going on?" I asked, still reeling from the encounter. "Later," she snapped, slamming the door shut as I jumped in. She floored the gas pedal, and the car shot down the alley, the tires screeching in protest. I glanced over at her. "Who was that? What's happening?" She didn't answer right away, keeping her eyes on the road as we sped through the streets. The city lights blurred past us, each one like a moment I couldn't grasp. "Just someone who's been watching you," she finally said, her voice tight with urgency. "You don't know how deep this goes, Ethan. You've been marked. And now, so am I." I stared at her, my head spinning. "Marked? For what?" Allison glanced at me, a flicker of something dark passing across her face. "Your father wasn't just a businessman. He had enemies. Powerful ones. People who are not happy you found out about that will. People who want you to stay quiet." The realization hit me like a gut punch. I was just a pawn in a game I didn't understand, and someone was pulling strings from the shadows. "Who's trying to kill me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Allison's lips tightened, but she didn't answer. She wasn't going to give me anything more. I looked out the window as we turned another corner. My mind raced, piecing together the fragmented truths. Walter Caldwell had built an empire, but that empire wasn't just business, it was a web of power and secrecy. I was at the center of it now. The car jolted to a stop, and I instinctively reached for the door handle. "Where are we?" I asked. Allison didn't answer, just pushed open her door and stepped out. I followed, my pulse racing as I surveyed the area. We were in a quiet part of town, away from the bustling streets. An industrial area, the kind of place where things could disappear without anyone noticing. She didn't wait for me to speak. "We need to find something. A file. Your father's last transaction. It's the only way we can figure out who's pulling the strings. We have to get to it before they do." I nodded, my brain still in overdrive. The information was out there, somewhere. And whoever was after me knew exactly where it was. I could feel the weight of every decision pressing on me. The stakes were higher than I ever imagined, and I had no idea who I could trust. The law? My parents? Allison? Every step I took felt like a step deeper into the unknown. "We don't have much time," Allison said, her voice hard and determined. She glanced around. "Let's move." We moved quickly through the shadows, darting between buildings and glancing over our shoulders. Every step seemed to echo, each sound magnified in the silence around us. The tension was unbearable. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked as we stopped in front of a worn-down warehouse. Allison nodded. "Walter kept everything here. It's the last place anyone would think to look. We need to get inside." I followed her to the door, and just as she reached for the handle, I heard something, footsteps. Fast, deliberate. I froze. "We're not alone." Allison's face went pale. She grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a nearby crate. The footsteps drew closer, and I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Just as the figure came into view, everything went black. Cliffhanger. "You're not as safe as you think," a voice whispered from the shadows. I could hear my heart beating, every thump pounding against my chest, every breath I took thick with tension. I'd escaped, but I wasn't free. Not yet. Every step I took, every turn I made, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. The eyes of those who were watching, waiting for me to make the wrong move. It felt like a game, one that I hadn't agreed to play, and now, I was stuck in the middle of it. Are you sure this is the place? I asked, my voice tight as I glanced at Allison, who was walking ahead of me, her face expressionless. This is where Walter kept his secrets. It's the only place he trusted, she replied without turning. Everything you need to know is here, Ethan. But you have to understand, once we step inside, there's no turning back. I didn't answer. What was there to say? The man I'd called my father for all these years had hidden parts of himself, parts of our life together, that I couldn't even begin to understand. And now, I was learning that nothing about my life, my family, was what it seemed. We reached the dilapidated building, the smell of rust and old oil filling the air. The door creaked loudly as Allison pushed it open, and I followed her into the darkness. The dim light from the single overhead bulb flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Stay close, she muttered as we stepped inside. The air was heavy with dust, and every step we took sent a cloud of it into the air. The floorboards groaned under our weight, a constant reminder that this place had been abandoned long ago. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was here. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't just the silence. It was the tension, the sense that something was about to happen. Allison walked with purpose, heading toward the back of the room where a large metal cabinet stood. She didn't look at me, didn't speak. She just moved quickly, methodically, as if she knew exactly what she was looking for. And maybe she did. Allison, I said, my voice breaking through the silence, what exactly are we looking for here? She paused, her fingers brushing against the metal cabinet. She didn't turn to face me, but I could feel the weight of her gaze even without seeing her eyes. Everything, she said quietly. The truth. The truth about Walter's past. About your real parents. About everything he was involved in. She yanked open the cabinet door, revealing rows of old files. Papers stacked on top of each other, some yellowed with age, others freshly marked with red ink. I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat as I stared at the pile of documents in front of me. This is it, Allison said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is the stuff they don't want you to find. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the first folder. The name on the front stopped me cold. David Morris. I felt a sharp jolt in my chest. That was my father's name, my biological father's name. But the files weren't about him. They were about Walter. About the deals he'd made, the ones that tied him to my real family in ways I didn't yet understand. I flipped open the first folder and scanned the pages quickly. The words jumped out at me, forged signatures, legal battles, blackmail. My mind spun. My father, David, hadn't been the man I'd been led to believe. Walter hadn't just abandoned me. He'd orchestrated it. All of it. He'd kept me hidden, controlled, and now I was discovering the truth through these papers, these files that had been buried for years. Allison, what the hell is all this? I asked, my voice rising as I looked at her in disbelief. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she grabbed another folder and flipped it open, revealing a series of photographs. I took a step forward, squinting at the images. It was a picture of Walter and David together. But it wasn't just a picture. There was a message scrawled on the back, "We're in this together. Don't let him find out." What is this? Why did they hide this from me? My voice shook with anger. Why didn't you tell me? Allison met my gaze, her face hard. Because you weren't supposed to know. Walter wanted to protect you, keep you safe from all of this. But it's not just about you. It's about the bigger picture. Your father, your real father, didn't just vanish. He was pushed out, and now it's time to find out why. I was beginning to understand. Slowly. But the more I saw, the more I realized just how deep this rabbit hole went. But I wasn't the only one digging. A sound broke through the room, sharp and sudden. A car door slamming outside. Footsteps. Heavy, fast, closing in. Get down. Allison hissed, shoving me behind a stack of crates. I didn't need to ask what was happening. I knew. We weren't alone. Someone was coming. Someone who didn't want us to find what we were looking for. I could hear the voices now, muffled but unmistakable. They were getting closer. Stay quiet, Allison whispered, her breath steady as she peered around the crates. They'll be in here any second. I held my breath, every muscle in my body taut with fear. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, trying to figure out how we could escape. But nothing came. Nothing except the sound of footsteps growing louder. Then, the door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat. Time seemed to stretch, as though the seconds were crawling by in slow motion. I didn't dare move. Through the small gap between the crates, I saw a shadow cross the room. It stopped right by the desk. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. And then, in one smooth motion, the shadow turned and came straight toward us. Allison, I whispered urgently. What do we do now? She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes locked onto mine. And I realized she didn't know either. I could feel the sweat beating on my forehead, but I didn't dare move. The shadows in the abandoned warehouse were closing in on us, the smell of damp concrete thick in the air. Allison was still crouched beside me, her breath steady, but I could see her eyes flickering with uncertainty. She was used to this, used to the game we were both playing now, but this was new. Stay low, she whispered, her voice like ice. But there was something off in the way she said it. Something I hadn't noticed before. The footsteps were getting closer. I could feel the tension in the room rise with every step, every creak of the floorboard. And just when I thought I might lose it, when I thought the world would finally cave in on me, Allison stood. Allison, what the hell are you doing? I hissed, barely keeping my voice from shaking. But she didn't answer. She walked toward the open door like she was moving through a dream, her body tense but sure. I hesitated for just a second, long enough for the person to step into the warehouse behind her. It wasn't just one person. There were three. All dressed in black. Their faces obscured by shadows. I felt my heart slam into my chest. Allison. I called, but she wasn't listening. She was already past the threshold, staring into the dark alleyway like she knew exactly who was coming. Allison, stop. I grabbed her arm, but she shook me off with a surprising force. Her eyes met mine, cold and distant. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Stay back, Ethan, she said, her voice sharp. I can handle this. She turned to face the three men who had emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hidden under dark hoods, but their body language was unmistakable. They weren't here to talk. A sharp pang of realization hit me. They weren't after Allison. They were after me. I watched as one of the men, the tallest of the three, stepped forward. His voice was deep, almost too calm. You've been digging, Ethan. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat felt dry, like I was choking on the truth I wasn't ready to face. Did you really think it would be that easy? The man continued, his voice growing colder with each word. You're nothing more than a pawn in a game you don't even understand. Allison looked at me, her eyes hardening. You don't get it, Ethan. You never did. I felt the world shift beneath my feet. The betrayal was like a slap across my face, sharp and brutal. I wanted to speak, to ask why, but the words stuck in my throat. Allison wasn't the ally I thought she was. She had been playing her own game this whole time. She was as much a part of this mess as anyone else. What the hell are you talking about? I managed to choke out. I was trying to protect you, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. But you don't listen. You never did. You had to find out the hard way. I could barely process her words. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, knocking the air from my lungs. She wasn't here to help me. She was here to keep me quiet. Who are they? I demanded, stepping closer to her. She took a step back, her eyes flicking toward the men, then back at me. People who are tired of the lies, Ethan. People who want answers. Your answers. The men stepped forward in unison, each one like a shadow closing in on me. I didn't move. I couldn't. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But everything I'd learned up to this point was crashing down around me. You were never meant to know, Ethan, Allison said, her tone almost apologetic. Your father, Walter, he made sure of that. You weren't supposed to find out about David or about the things Walter did to protect you. My mind spun. What do you mean? What did Walter do? More than you can imagine, she replied softly, stepping closer now, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't just raise you. He hid you. From everything. From your past, from your real family. From the truth. And now, because of all your digging, we have to clean up the mess. My pulse hammered in my ears. The tension was unbearable. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. But there was no escaping now. I had no idea how deep this conspiracy went, but I was in the thick of it. The men advanced again. This time, I wasn't sure if they were going to kill me or drag me away. Allison's gaze softened just slightly, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. I'm sorry, Ethan. But this is the only way. I didn't have time to process her words before one of the men lunged at me, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the door. Get off me. I struggled, but his grip was like iron. You're not going anywhere, Ethan, he said, his voice cold. I kicked out, but another man grabbed my other arm, restraining me. I was surrounded. They had me trapped. This is it, Ethan, Allison said, her voice a mix of regret and finality. You're not just dealing with your father's mess anymore. This is bigger than you. Bigger than all of us. I fought against them, but it was useless. You've been marked, she added, her voice quieter now. There's no way out. The sound of footsteps echoed as they dragged me away, pulling me toward an uncertain fate. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Allison had betrayed me, and now these men, whoever they were taking me to God knows where. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of my heartbeat in my ears, and the crushing realization that my life had just turned into something far darker than I ever could have imagined. And then, as I was pulled out into the cold night, I heard one last thing, spoken by one of the men. Time to finish this, Ethan. The game's over. Cliffhanger. No more hiding, no more running, the man said, his grip tightening on my arm. You're about to learn the truth. The air felt thicker than usual. I was no longer just a man fighting to uncover a family secret. I was the target now, trapped in a game I hadn't chosen to play. As I sat across from David Morris, my biological father, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me, every decision, every move I'd made until this point leading me to this moment. David's cold eyes steadied me like a predator assessing its prey. He was calm, too calm. His face hadn't aged a day, even as the world around him crumbled. This wasn't just about money, it was something deeper, something much darker. You still don't get it, do you? His voice was low, almost casual. All of this, your life, your father's empire, was never meant for you. You were always a pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing. I could barely keep my composure. You abandoned me. You left me, I spat. And now you think you can just waltz in and claim what's mine. David leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him like a master chess player contemplating his next move. No, Ethan. It was never yours. You were never supposed to be part of this life. You weren't a son. You were an asset. Something to be controlled, manipulated. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The anger was building, rising like a tidal wave. But I couldn't let it overwhelm me. I needed answers. I needed the truth. Then why keep me alive? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Why keep me in the dark for all these years? David's lips curled into a cold smile. Because you're the key to everything. Walter knew it. I knew it. But he wasn't ready to let you go. You were meant to inherit something much bigger than a few $1,000,000. You were meant to inherit the legacy, the power. Everything clicked. The inheritance. The strange trust. The will that didn't feel right. Walter hadn't left me money, he'd left me a burden, a symbol of a bigger scheme. He'd wanted me to step into his shoes. And now, David was here to claim that inheritance. You used me, I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. David stood up and walked over to the window, his back to me. I did what I had to do. But now, it's your turn. It's time to finish what we started. I was no longer the pawn. I was the king. But what was the cost of that power? I could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Time was running out. The game was nearing its end, but I wasn't sure who would be left standing when the dust settled. What do you want from me? I demanded. You've already taken everything. David's eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something else. Regret? Guilt? It passed so quickly that I wasn't sure I had seen it at all. What I want, Ethan, is for you to understand. The world doesn't work the way you think it does. Walter's empire, my empire, it was built on blood, on power, on control. And you, whether you like it or not, are part of that legacy. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I was tired of the games. Tired of the lies. But most of all, I was tired of being controlled. I stood up, my legs shaking but my resolve hardening. You don't get to decide my future. Not anymore. Before I could process what was happening, the door slammed open. I turned, heart racing, and saw Allison standing there, gun in hand. Allison, what the hell? I exclaimed, my breath catching in my throat. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I'm sorry, Ethan, she said, her voice emotionless. But it's too late for you. It was never about you, it was always about the power. David's smile widened. You see, Ethan, there's always someone waiting in the wings. Always someone who will use you, betray you. Power doesn't belong to the weak. I stood there, frozen. The realization hit me like a freight train. Allison had never been on my side. She was part of this all along. But I wasn't going down without a fight. In one swift motion, I lunged toward David, grabbing the nearest object I could, an old lamp, and hurled it toward Allison. The glass shattered, sending her stumbling backward in shock. It was a split-second opportunity, and I wasn't about to waste it. I darted for the door, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Behind me, I could hear Allison's footsteps, and I knew she wasn't far behind. I burst through the door and into the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise of the sirens grew louder, and I didn't know if they were coming for me or for the people I'd just left behind. The only thing that mattered now was escape. As I ran, I realized something. This was my life now. Running. Hiding. Searching for the truth. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like I could finally take control of it. I burst into the alley, the cold night air slapping my face. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit echoed in the distance. The chase wasn't over. But in that moment, I understood one thing. You can't run from your past. But you can always choose your future. Cliffhanger. You're not getting away, Ethan, Allison shouted from the doorway. Not this time.